Every insult, every act of betrayal, every time you were met with the silent treatment, and every cruel word spoken to you was serving a specific purpose, but it was likely not the one you think. Today, you are going to discover the deeply uncomfortable truth that lies hidden beneath narcissistic cruelty. You will learn why hurting you actually provides them with something they feel they desperately need, and why truly understanding this dynamic changes everything about how you approach your own healing journey. If you have ever found yourself wondering why someone who once claimed to love you suddenly transformed into someone cold, dismissive, or intentionally cruel, please stay until the very end. The answer you are looking for is not found in the words they said to you. It is hidden inside the things they could never admit to anyone, not even to themselves. If this conversation helps you finally make sense of experiences you have struggled to explain for so long, I encourage you to subscribe and join this community. Every single week, we break down the complex psychology behind toxic relationships so that you can stop blaming yourself and start seeing these patterns with total clarity. One of the most difficult truths to accept after you have experienced narcissistic abuse is that the pain inflicted upon you was never truly a reflection of your own value. It feels deeply personal because the attacks are almost always directed at your character, your emotions, your appearance, your intelligence, or your deepest vulnerabilities. Over time, it becomes incredibly easy to believe that if you had only been a bit more loving, a bit more patient, or somehow better in some way, the abuse would have stopped. But this belief overlooks the fundamental psychological reality that is driving narcissistic behavior. Their actions are deeply rooted in an unstable sense of self that depends entirely on constantly protecting a very fragile ego. When they experience insecurity, criticism, rejection, or even the looming possibility of losing control, they search for any way to relieve the unbearable discomfort churning inside them. Instead of confronting their own inner fears or accepting responsibility for their feelings, they choose to redirect those painful emotions outward. The closest person in their life often becomes the easiest target because they have taken the time to study your hopes, your fears, and your deepest emotional needs. And they use that knowledge as a weapon whenever they feel threatened. Their cruelty is actually much less about who you are and far more about what they are desperately trying to escape within themselves. This explains why they may treat completely different people in remarkably similar ways, despite those individuals having entirely different personalities. The pattern follows them wherever they go because the source of the problem is always traveling with them. Understanding this does not excuse the abuse, nor does it erase the damage it causes to your life. It simply shifts the focus away from the destructive question of what is wrong with me and toward the far more accurate realization that you were simply caught in the emotional storm created by someone who could not tolerate facing their own internal insecurity. The moment you stop measuring your worth through their behavior is the exact moment their distorted version of you begins to lose its power over your life. For a person with narcissistic tendencies, emotional pain is often used as a tool of control rather than an accidental consequence of conflict. Most healthy relationships are built on the foundations of mutual respect, compromise, and emotional safety, where disagreements are resolved through honest and open communication. A narcissistic individual, however, frequently views relationships through a lens of power and dominance. The question for them is never, how do we solve this problem together? But rather, who has the upper hand in this interaction? When they sense that their influence over you is slipping away, they may resort to behaviors specifically designed to destabilize you emotionally. This can include the silent treatment, harsh criticism, gaslighting, public humiliation, broken promises, intense jealousy, or sudden emotional withdrawal. Each of these tactics is meant to create profound uncertainty, causing you to focus less on your own needs and more on regaining the narcissist's approval. As your confusion grows, your confidence inevitably begins to shrink. You may find yourself overanalyzing every single conversation, apologizing for things you did not even do, or walking on eggshells just to avoid triggering another painful episode. This shift is exactly what strengthens the position of the narcissist. The more emotionally exhausted and self-doubting you become, the easier you are to influence and manipulate. Even brief moments of kindness after long periods of cruelty can deepen this cycle, creating a false sense of hope that the relationship is finally improving, while simultaneously reinforcing your emotional dependence on them. Over time, you may find yourself confusing relief with love, believing that the temporary return of affection means they have genuinely changed. In reality, the unpredictable alternation between warmth and hostility keeps the entire relationship emotionally off balance, making it increasingly difficult for you to leave. Control is maintained not through a foundation of genuine connection, but through a constant cycle of uncertainty, fear, and the perpetual pursuit of emotional stability. The narcissist often experiences this dominance as a form of reassurance that they still matter, that they still possess influence, and that they can shape another person's emotional world whenever they choose, which reinforces a cycle that revolves entirely around power rather than authentic intimacy. One of the greatest misconceptions about narcissistic behavior is the idea that they feel threatened only by direct criticism or rejection. In reality, your personal growth, your emotional stability, and your increasing independence can become just as unsettling to them. A narcissist often feels most comfortable when they believe they are the absolute center of your emotional world. If your confidence depends on their approval, if your decisions revolve around their opinions, or if your happiness rises and falls entirely with their current mood, they experience a very reassuring sense of control. The moment you begin developing your own identity, setting healthy boundaries, pursuing meaningful goals, or finding genuine fulfillment outside of the relationship, that sense of control begins to weaken. To a psychologically healthy partner, your independence would be something to celebrate and support. To a narcissist, however, it may feel like a direct threat to their own importance. They may respond by criticizing your ambitions, mocking your achievements, questioning your judgment, or creating unnecessary conflict whenever you experience a moment of success. Sometimes they become intentionally distant or dismissive during your happiest moments, not because your accomplishments lack value, but because your growing confidence serves as a painful reminder that you no longer rely on them for your validation. This shift can awaken deep underlying fears in them of being abandoned, ignored, or exposed as being less significant than they so desperately want to believe. Rather than processing those fears honestly, they often attempt to pull you back into a position of self-doubt. They may remind you of past mistakes, compare you unfavorably to others, or subtly undermine your confidence until you begin questioning yourself again. Their goal is not always conscious or carefully planned, but the pattern always serves the same purpose. If you doubt your own strength, you are much more likely to seek reassurance from the very person who is creating that insecurity in the first place. This allows the narcissist to restore the imbalance of power that feels familiar to them, replacing your growing autonomy with renewed emotional dependence and preserving the control they fear losing more than anything else. One of the most confusing aspects of narcissistic behavior is how confidently they accuse others of the very qualities they struggle to acknowledge within themselves. This psychological process, known as projection, allows them to distance themselves from painful emotions that they simply cannot tolerate. Deep beneath the carefully constructed image of superiority or confidence often lies an intense, gnawing fear of inadequacy, shame, rejection, or failure. Instead of confronting these uncomfortable feelings, they unconsciously assign them to someone else. If they secretly feel insecure, they may repeatedly call you weak or incompetent. If they struggle with their own history of dishonesty, they may constantly accuse you of being untrustworthy. If they harbor deep-seated envy, they may insist that you are the jealous one. These accusations often seem completely irrational because they are not based on objective reality, but rather on the internal emotions the narcissist is trying to escape. Over time, this constant stream of blame can become deeply disorienting for you. You may find yourself constantly defending against claims that do not match your behavior, questioning your own memory, or wondering whether you really are the person they describe. This confusion serves another purpose by shifting all of the attention away from the narcissist's own behavior and placing you in a permanent state of self-examination. Meanwhile, they successfully avoid the painful task of looking inward. The more you focus on proving your innocence, the less energy you have left to recognize the unhealthy dynamics unfolding all around you. This is why conversations with a narcissist often feel circular and exhausting, with responsibility continually being redirected away from them. Understanding the nature of projection helps explain why their criticisms can seem so strangely disconnected from reality. Their words frequently reveal much more about the heavy emotional burdens they are carrying than they do about the actual person standing in front of them. Recognizing this pattern does not erase the emotional impact of their attacks, but it can finally help you stop internalizing accusations that were never an accurate reflection of your character in the first place. Before we continue, please take a moment to share your own experience in the comment section. Have you ever had that moment of clarity where you realized that the person you were talking to wasn't trying to win an argument, but was actually trying to hurt you? Sharing your story might help someone else recognize patterns they have been living with for years. And if you are finding genuine value in this discussion, please do not forget to like this video and subscribe for more psychology-based insights that can help you protect your emotional well-being. One of the most painful realizations for people who have experienced narcissistic abuse is recognizing that their own emotional reactions often became part of the cycle the narcissist relied upon. This does not mean you caused the abuse to happen, and it certainly does not mean that your feelings were wrong. Any person who is repeatedly exposed to persistent criticism, subtle manipulation, or consistent emotional neglect will naturally react with a range of human emotions, including deep sadness, rising anger, profound confusion, or paralyzing fear. The critical difference here is that a person with narcissistic traits may interpret these perfectly normal reactions in a way that is vastly different from how a healthy person would. Instead of perceiving your tears as a poignant signal to show compassion, or viewing your frustration as a genuine opportunity to sit down and resolve a conflict, they may instead interpret your emotional distress as undeniable evidence of their own influence and power over you. Your visible pain serves to reassure them that they still possess the unique ability to shape and dominate your emotional state. This twisted sense of control can temporarily soothe their own internal insecurity, which unfortunately means your reactions unintentionally end up reinforcing the very cycle you are trying to escape. That is precisely why they may continue provoking heated arguments long after the original issue has been completely settled. They might choose to repeat hurtful comments, deny obvious facts that you both know to be true, dredge up long forgotten mistakes, or deliberately push the emotional buttons they have learned about you over time. The primary goal of these actions is not necessarily to solve a disagreement, but to trigger an emotional response that confirms they still occupy the absolute center of your attention. Even intense negative emotions can serve this purpose for them because they demonstrate that your focus remains entirely fixed on their behavior. Over time, many people find themselves trapped in a soul-draining loop of explaining, defending, pleading, or trying desperately to make the narcissist understand the sheer depth of the pain they have caused. Sadly, these earnest efforts often produce little to no lasting change, because the act of interaction itself can reinforce the narcissist's warped sense of personal significance. Breaking out of this destructive pattern does not require you to suppress your feelings or pretend that the abuse did not leave a mark on your heart. Instead, it means gradually and intentionally redirecting your limited emotional energy toward your own healing and recovery, rather than continuing to seek validation, accountability, or empathy from someone who consistently uses your vulnerability as a metric for their own importance. At the very beginning of your relationship, a narcissist may have seemed deeply attentive, incredibly affectionate, and genuinely invested in your happiness. They took the time to notice your unique dreams. They mirrored your personal values. They showered you with sincere-sounding compliments. And they created the powerful feeling that you had finally met the one person who truly understood you at your core. This stage of the relationship can feel intensely validating because it satisfies a deep and natural human desire to be truly seen and appreciated for who you are. However, this period of idealization is often far less about them actually knowing you as a whole person and much more about them securing your admiration, your constant attention, and your deep emotional investment. As long as you continue to reflect back the specific image they want to see, the relationship may appear to be near perfect. The shift begins when the reality of life inevitably enters the picture. Perhaps you express an opinion that differs from theirs. You decide to establish a healthy personal boundary. You find yourself in need of some emotional support, or you simply stop providing the constant, unyielding admiration they crave. Instead of adapting to the normal give and take that defines a healthy relationship, the narcissist may interpret these ordinary human moments as direct personal threats. The constant admiration they once enjoyed no longer feels guaranteed, and their inner disappointment is quickly redirected outward toward you.